A deadly restaurant attack kills more than a dozen people in Burkina Faso's capital. A breastfeeding center helps female legislators and staff in Uganda resume work while continuing to nurse their babies. And Africa Fashion Week London brings color and African culture to the runway. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight in West Africa, where residents in the capital of Burkina Faso are on edge after gunmen attacked a restaurant overnight in Ouagadougou, killing at least 18 people and wounding several others. Authorities say security forces shot and killed both attackers and freed people trapped inside the building. Speaking at a press conference on Monday, the nation's communications minister Remy Darjinou called the massacre on the Aziz Istanbul eatery a terrorist attack. According to Reuters, a witness saw customers frantically fleeing the building as police and paramilitary surrounded it amid gunfire. The French foreign minister says a French citizen is among those killed. Although suspected militants are being blamed for the attack, there was no immediate claim of responsibility for the violence. Still in West Africa, tragedy has struck in Sierra Leone on Monday, where hundreds of people are likely to have been killed in a massive mudslide. The Red Cross says at least 179 bodies have been brought to the central morgue in the capital, Freetown. Red Cross spokesman Abu Bakr Tarawalieh says the death toll is expected to rise. At the scene of the mudslide in the mountain town of Regent, Sierra Leone, Vice President Victor Faure says it's likely that hundreds of people are buried underneath the rubble. Mudslides and floods are fairly common during the rainy season in West Africa, where deforestation and poor town planning put residents at risk. Kenyan Red Cross officials say at least 17 people have died in post-election violence in Nairobi and Kisumu. They also say this is not an official death toll, but a number based on what staff and volunteers had seen in morgues. Violence erupted across Kenya in opposition strongholds following last week's presidential election that saw incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta declared winner in a result disputed by opposition leader Raila Odinga. A Kenyan human rights group says 24 people were shot by police in the violence. But police say the number killed is 6 and that those killed were armed criminals who attacked officers who were attempting to arrest them. In the Kibera slum Sunday, at least 1,000 supporters gathered to hear remarks from Odinga, who says the poll was stolen from him and his supporters. He had words of support for his followers.
I will address you the day after tomorrow, but here today, I am telling Jubilee that they have spilled the blood of innocent people. They will pay for it. Because Jubilee has deployed troops with guns to kill innocent people, tomorrow you should not leave your house. There is no work tomorrow. Then on Tuesday, I will give you directions as to what you need to do.
Odinga called for a boycott from work on Monday, but Kenyans largely ignored the action. And for more insight and a look ahead in Kenya, I'm joined by Professor David Monda, a political scientist from City University of New York. Professor Monda, welcome again to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with the violent protests that broke out soon after the IEBC declared Uhuru Kenyatta the winner of August 8th election. Opposition leader Raila Odinga still says he does not agree with the outcome of that election, and he says tomorrow he is going to reveal the party's strategy. What are your thoughts on Odinga's reaction to this election?
To be honest, it's very regrettable. For one, because he was very quiet for 2 or 3 days, no statement, no press briefings. He appeared at press conferences and really said nothing. And at this point, it's open to speculation exactly what he's going to say tomorrow about the way forward. But it's interesting to note that members from his party, the two governors, two of his leading supporters, Governor Joho in Mombasa, things have been fairly quiet there. And in Kisumu, Governor Anyang' Nyong'o has been encouraging people to go back to work. So at this time, it's really up to speculation to exactly what his next move would be. But it seems to suggest that he might propose new rounds of mass action and street protests.
So today, Monday, President Uhuru Kenyatta has addressed the nation, and he has called out for peace and unity in the country, also calling on the losers of this election to seek legal redress. But what do you see as the political climate in Kenya leading to Kenyatta's inauguration?
I think the political climate is very tense, because we need to remember that about half of the country voted for Raila Odinga. So a large section of the Kenyan electorate is very disappointed and frustrated with the current situation. What's key going forward is to ensure that law enforcement agencies, the police and the paramilitary units are using restraint in terms of how they deal with a lot of the protesters, because we've been seeing allegations of the police using live rounds of ammunition, and there being a lot of deaths, up to 24 deaths. So this is very unfortunate. And going forward, it's very important that the government proceeds with caution, and especially in terms of how law enforcement engage some of these demonstrators from the opposition.
Now, going back to Raila Odinga, the New York Times yesterday, Sunday, had an editorial putting him on the spot, actually. And I'm wondering, is Odinga on a political path to self-destruction? Can he redeem himself as a second liberator, as he has always argued, and as a statesman?
I think at this point he's sliding down that precipitous hill, to self-destruct. But I think I also have to add that, a lot of opposition supporters are very frustrated, and I think that needs to be taken into account. As much as Jubilee supporters were celebrating, I think opposition supporters should be allowed that environment and space to cry, to be frustrated and to be upset, as long as they're not destroying property. Now, it's incumbent upon Raila Odinga to set the path forward and the agenda for the opposition, clearly drawing exactly what his plans will be. It's important that he emphasize a constitutional process to challenge some of the irregularities that the opposition claim were in the elections, using the courts specifically to address a lot of these concerns.
So what should Kenyans be doing at this point, given that they are kind of torn apart between the leaders? Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly, I think Kenyans need to avoid a situation where they're being used by political, by politicians to create chaos and to kill each other. But I think it's incumbent upon those in the opposition to make sure that their demonstrators are demonstrating peacefully and that they follow a legal path to seek redress. And again, on the part of the government, to ensure that there's the space for opposition to protest and to show their displeasure with the results, but also showing restraint in terms of how law enforcement controls a lot of these demonstrations.
Right. Professor, we appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
David Monda is a political scientist from City University of New York. Now to the United States and the deadly violence that erupted at white supremacists' rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. A car plowed into a crowd of counter-protesters on Saturday, killing a 32-year-old woman. A 20-year-old man has been charged with murder and other crimes for allegedly driving his vehicle into the crowd. 19 others were injured, and 2 Virginia State Police troopers who had been monitoring the unrest from the air were killed in a helicopter crash. President Donald Trump is under attack across the U.S. political spectrum for his failure to denounce white supremacists who staged the Unite the Right rally.
The president condemned what he called an egregious display of hatred, bigotry and violence on many sides Saturday, just hours after a car rammed into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing 32-year-old Charlottesville resident Heather Heyer and injuring 19 others. But Trump did not directly condemn the extremist groups who organized Saturday's protest, many of them his political supporters who openly derided racial minorities, Jews and women. Vice President Mike Pence defended Trump during a visit to Colombia on Sunday.
I will say I take issue with the fact that many in the national media spend more time criticizing the president's words than they did criticizing those who perpetrated the violence to begin with. We should be putting the attention where it belongs, and that is on these extremist groups that need to be pushed out of the public debate entirely and discredited for the hate groups and dangerous fringe groups that they are.
The White House defended Trump's reaction in a statement released Sunday, saying the president, quote, condemns all forms of violence, bigotry and hatred, and of course that includes white supremacists, KKK, neo-Nazi and all extremist groups. The victims were remembered at a vigil Sunday in Charlottesville.
To pay tribute to a woman who actually now is a martyr, an unwilling martyr. She was murdered by the alt-right, the people who try to take over our community, and we are so sad.
2 Virginia state troopers who had been monitoring the unrest from the air were killed in a helicopter crash. Before the Saturday violence, torch-bearing white nationalists marched through the University of Virginia campus on Friday night and gathered around the statue of General Robert E. Lee, a Confederate Civil War hero. The city voted in April to remove the statue, a move being taken by many U.S. cities against such Confederate memorials. Since then, Charlottesville has been a focus of white nationalist protests. Heidi Adams-Fitzpatrick, VOA News, Washington.
A former Nigerian oil minister, Diezani Alison Madueke, is facing charges in several countries, accused of using her office to amass a fortune from bribery. VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young details the scope of her alleged international criminal enterprise.
Allegations of massive corruption, bribery, and aided by protection at the highest levels. These charges are what former Nigerian oil minister Diezani Alison Madueke faces at home and also in the United States, Britain, and Italy. Officials say her pile of purported corruption-connected cash and properties could total close to $1 billion US. As oil minister from 2010 to 2015 during the term of Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan, Alison Madueke allegedly granted huge oil contracts to people who repaid the favors with cash and palatial properties in luxurious neighborhoods in Lagos, London, and New York City. Recently, Nigerian authorities seized properties of hers in Lagos said to be worth some $37.5 million. The latest legal action against her came in July 2017 with a U.S. federal civil suit seeking to seize some $140 million in assets, including a $50 million Manhattan condominium and an $80 million yacht allegedly obtained for her by 2 associates. This after Britain arrested her in October 2015 on criminal money laundering charges connected to the purchase of at least 4 multi-million-dollar luxury flats in London. The U.S. charges against Alison Madueke are civil rather than criminal, but the investigation could grow, according to, via Skype, former U.S. State Department Nigeria specialist Matthew Page.
That's sort of the first step that U.S. authorities are going after. But it's likely that additional asset forfeiture cases and criminal charges against Madueke and her many, many associates and facilitators will be forthcoming over the next few years.
In 2015, President Muhammadu Buhari ended a system that allowed Alison Madueke and other government officials to deposit ministry funds into commercial banks rather than the central bank. This provided huge opportunities for abuse, as explained via Skype from Cape Town by Stellenbosch University law professor Sophie Williams-Ellegsby.
So when we had that system, there was a lot of scope for abuse, and that system was being abused. You would have public officials put government money in a deposit money bank, and they would cream off the interest, of course, with the collusion of banking officials themselves.
A major investigation involving Alison Madueke is also underway in Italy, with an oil company called ENI and Shell. The magnitude of that alleged corruption is described via Skype from London by watchdog NGO Global Witness analyst Barnaby Pace.
Is one of the biggest scandals in the history of the oil industry. They're alleged to have paid over $1 billion that was diverted away from the Nigerian people, the majority of it alleged by prosecutors to have gone as bribes, including $500 million that was converted into cash in Nigeria, and that the Italian authorities allege was used to bribe Nigerian officials, including, they say, Diazani Alison Madueke.
Muhammadu Buhari's successful 2015 Nigerian presidential bid was built in large part on his pledge to fight government corruption. While he has indeed taken steps in that direction, analysts say that the effort has to include scrutiny of all officials, present and former, regardless of their political affiliations. Jeffrey Young, VOA News.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a breastfeeding center helps Ugandan MPs juggle work and motherhood. Stay with us.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
Welcome back. The World Health Organization is recommending exclusive breastfeeding for a baby's first 6 months of life and continued breastfeeding up to age 2. But this recommendation can be a struggle for working mothers. Uganda's parliament is promoting breastfeeding with a free on-site daycare center for female legislators and their staff. Halima Athumani reports from Kampala.
Uganda's parliament has about 153 female legislators, many of childbearing age. So lawmakers have taken steps to help female MPs juggle their full-time job and motherhood. Legislators such as Taka Agnes Wejuli, whose 4-month-old son spends his day at the parliamentary daycare center.
Yeah, vaccine. When I'm coming very early, I don't even have to bathe my baby. I just get him out of sleep, put him in his car seat, lock the vehicle, and we run up to here. I drop him here and I attend the meetings, I attend committee meetings, I attend plenary in the afternoon, so I'm always there all the time.
The Speaker of the Ugandan Parliament, Rebecca Alitwala Kadaga, opened up the facility almost 2 years ago to serve women MPs and staff. The facility has a kitchen, baby bathroom, sleep and play areas, and most importantly, a breastfeeding room, which Speaker Kadaga says has enabled greater female participation in Parliament.
In the past, one would either have to leave Parliament and go back home, depending on where he or she lives, that would take time. Either she would have to do part of the work or abandon the work altogether and come back tomorrow. Because the traffic alone, if you're traveling back and forth between the city and your home, it takes time.
You're welcome. 2 nannies manage the facility. Parliamentary Research Assistant Shiba Namara dashes in during a break to feed her 3-month-old baby.
Just the comfort of being at work, yet at the same time knowing that your child is safe and you can walk in any time, is really the best service that they could ever do.
Uganda is among just 23 countries in the world where more than 60% of babies are exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life, according to the 2017 Global Breastfeeding Scorecard. But Ugandan health officials say there is still room for improvement. Thanks to the Parliament's initiative, every government institution in the country has been ordered to open up a breastfeeding center. Halima Athmani for VOA News, Kampala.
Detroit, Michigan knows both hardship and recovery. One of the hardest hit areas in the country during the Great Recession. The upper Midwestern Rust Belt city has since found an ingredient to its economic revitalization through empowerment of its immigrant communities. But it's not everyone, but not everyone is convinced that the solution is viable or helps anyone beyond the immigrants themselves. VOA's Raymond Taylor with that report.
Detroit has earned the nickname America's Comeback City for a reason.
This is the main the street of Banglatown. All the commercial districts are right here. This is where the revitalization is taking place.
During the Great Recession, the Midwestern city suffered an unemployment rate of 28.4%. Businesses closed and native-born residents left. But in recent years, immigrants have begun to replace them. In Banglatown, a once poverty-stricken neighborhood shared by Detroit and Hamtramck, Michigan, one entrepreneur is leading a movement to create a thriving cultural tourist destination.
You will hardly find any vacant spot right now. The value of the homes had gone up. Since then, businesses has been thriving and traffic has gone up tremendously.
A study by Global Detroit and the New American Economy says the influx of immigrants has prevented further population decline and is responsible for increasing the total housing value and creating or preserving more than 1,700 local manufacturing jobs. But the extent to which immigrants can be credited for the city's recovery is up for debate. The city continues to face significant barriers. Political scientist Stanley Renchan says it's misleading to consider immigrants a magic bullet.
You increase the overall financial welfare numbers of the country, but the people who benefit most from that are the immigrants themselves. And that's fine. You know, we want them to prosper. But please don't tell me that what you're doing is saving the country or the city or the town.
The Trump administration argues that low-skilled immigrants take away opportunities for native-born Americans. But Global Detroit director Steve Tabachman says foreign-born residents are doing precisely the opposite.
We see a hard-working yet very low-income community, and what I expect to see is through more people moving into the city, particularly because immigrants are driving that, neighborhood stabilizing, and those communities that stabilize will begin to retain and attract new businesses, create more jobs, and that is the pathway forward.
The positive impact of immigrant neighborhoods in Metro Detroit can be seen in long-established areas like Mexican Town, known for its vibrant restaurant scene. Jalisco native Jose de Jesus Lopez is owner of one of the neighborhood's longest-serving Mexican restaurants, a thriving business in a once-abandoned lot. The secret to his success, he says, is patience.
Tenemos que pensar en Detroit como nuestro hogar, que la gente se sienta segura aquí. Y está sucediendo poco a poco. Y los grandes cambios no suceden del día, de la noche a la mañana. Los grandes cambios suceden lentos. Y pues es parte de creer en uno, creer en Detroit.
In Lopez's words, the American dream is about creating something that can outlive him and that will continue to provide for others. Ramon Taylor, VOA News, Detroit.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. African fashion hits the London catwalks. We'll be right back.
To work and very grateful as we assess the situation.
Desejé a todos olayat أيها الشعب التونسي وأيضا المسلمين.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. African designers from all over the continent were in London last weekend for a stunning showcase of their designs. Africa Fashion Week London features 2 days of runway shows and exhibitions from new and emerging designers who are inspired by the rich culture of Africa and incorporate this heritage into their designs. Europe's largest African-inspired fashion event debuted in 2011 and in its 7th year is bringing together fashionistas and industry professionals. And in other fashion news, the 16th Fashion Carnival Parade dazzled crowds of Jember, East Java on Sunday. The event was the culmination of the annual carnival, which ran from 9 to 13 August and had victory as the main theme. The parade along a street stage featured costumes representing not only Indonesia's traditions and cultures, but also popular trends. More than 1,000 participants of all ages competed for awards throughout the 5-day event. And finally, ride-sharing app Uber has not done well in Seoul. The flagship Uber's ride-hailing service was withdrawn from the South Korean capital in 2015 after protests from local taxi drivers and the Seoul city government. But despite this, they're hoping to win over Seoul residents with their Uber Eats app. The app promises to be user-friendly with ordering options in various languages. The service will then bring your meal right to your door. And that's what's trending today. Now, some countries depend heavily on fossil fuels for power, including the Philippines. But now a kind of solar energy flower is among the clean power alternatives there. The smart flower can produce 40% more energy than a traditional rooftop solar design. VOA's Deborah Block tells us more.
This might look like a piece of modern art, but it's actually an award-winning solar power design. Inspired by a sunflower, each 59 square meter unit has 12 solar panel petals that track the sun's light rays as they move during the day.
It'll show your friends, colleagues, business partners, or competitors you're really committed to going green, reducing your carbon footprint, and being a good steward of the environment.
Each unit is easily transportable and programmed to work autonomously. At sunrise, the system opens or blooms to expand its petals. Once it detects the sun has set, it shuts down and also closes in bad weather, like heavy rain. The first smart flower was set up at a school to show people the importance of using clean energy.
By getting their attention, it will give us a time for us to share our advocacy, to share with them the reason why we're using this.
Students at the school feel the same way.
We really want to save energy and also save the environment at the same time.
Even though coal generates almost half the power in the Philippines, the smart flower is providing an option that relies on much cleaner, renewable energy. Deborah Block, VOA News, Washington.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune into VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching, and good night from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Headlights are the two bright lights in front of a car. But what does a deer have to do with headlights?
I cannot believe you got to meet Hillary Clinton. That must have been so incredible.
I know. It was so incredible that I couldn't say anything. I was like a deer caught in headlights.
Well, that's understandable, but maybe next